go. And there we go. Perfect. There it goes. All right, guys. Hey, I'm back. So my hair got all like messed up because of the I got all messed up because of the wind. It's like super windy outside, and it's like freaking freezing outside. So it's really cold here. So like I don't feel like fixing my hair, so I'm gonna just put on the hat. All right. Perfect. Yay! All right, cool. All right, we're good to go. Good to go. Yeah, we're going live, right? Yeah. Waiting to see if I see anything on YouTube. Hey, if you're on YouTube or Facebook, hey, go in. There you go. Yeah. Hey, guys. Okay, cool. All right, so it's study group time. For those of you who are new to the study group, we get together every Wednesday, every Friday evening. And this is after the readings time because that was the last hour before this one. So now we're doing study groups. So on Wednesdays we do A Course in Miracles, and then on Fridays we do Conversations with God. So today we're doing Conversations with God, and the book is by Neil Donald Walsh. It's one of my favorites. And what we do is basically read from the book, and then I comment and give my own perspective, my own spin on some of the information that is being discussed. And you're also welcome to ask me regarding the content. So we're not doing personal readings. If you're like tuning in, trying to get a personal reading or get some me to connect with the loved one in spirit, that's not happening in this hour. We're only doing study group time. So if you're showing up for a reading, you're going to have to come back next week. But for study group, you can ask me questions about the content or spiritual-based questions regarding the topic that we are going to be discussing from the book. So Neil is a guy who basically got tired and frustrated waiting around for life to get better. And so he had it out and hashed it out with God one night in the middle of the night, just like started like, why, and so he started to hear a voice in his mind and he started to write down what it was saying. So he was having this dialogue or conversation with God, and it went on to become 3 bestsellers and became a worldwide multi-million-dollar best-selling book because of how incredible the information is. It is a lot of really good spiritual knowledge and wisdom, but it's a lot to take in as well. So you kind of have to do a few passes of it to really get the grasp of some of the information that they're talking about, because it can kind of sometimes be way over our heads. And I remember when I first read it, the very first time back in like the late 90s or early 2000s, when I first read it, it was way over my head. I was like, oh, there was a lot that I was like, what? But it also was very eye-opening for me as well, and I was able to grasp it. Now, as I read it today, there are things that I've learned and gained throughout the years that I now find myself automatically knowing through experience, and so this just kind of verifies or validates the experience. And that's what good spiritual knowledge should do. Spiritual wisdom, teachings from the masters, they shouldn't tell us what to think or tell us who to be. They should affirm what we realize we are, and they should essentially support what we already know ourselves to be and know ourselves to be able to do, and affirms our experience in life from a perspective of high awareness and understanding in that way. So it should be more of an affirmation, not the source of. Now, of course, you can use it as a source if you want to know, but you're still going to have to integrate that information. And that happens a lot. A lot of people, they will read spiritual material or spiritual books, and then they won't integrate it. And so they'll only regurgitate it, but they don't know what that actually means. So you have a lot of people who have a tendency of just repeating what sounds good or what sounds, very highly wise and spiritual, but they don't have it integrated in their own life, and they haven't really experienced it in the real world. And that's what this is about. This is about us having a conversation and taking the material, taking the knowledge, the wisdom, and actually integrating and using it in real world scenarios, in real world examples, in real world situations. Because people can, spout off and say whatever they want about what they believe, but when you have to deal with it in a real world situation, it's a lot harder sometimes to implement, or it doesn't work, or it's really not a good and as wise as people may say. So All right, so I'm going to start off. So whenever I'm reading as Neil, I will say Neil, and then I'll read the section. And when I'm speaking as God, then I'll say God, and then I'll read the section. So the last time we were here, and I'll look to see if you guys have anything to say before I get started, because sometimes y'all will tell me, Ferny, we can't hear you. And I'm like, I don't want to go on for 30 minutes and then y'all couldn't hear me. Because that happens, right? That happens. All right, cool. Let's see, please. Charles Rellenos. Chiles Rellenos. I'm like, Charles. It's funny because whenever I see, CH, oh, good, I'm having dinner in God. Whenever my friend, whenever Michelle, because whenever I see, Chile, Chile, that's for me, Chile, like jalapeno. But Michelle would always say chile and would spell it like Chile. And so whenever she would say, I actually thought she was saying Chile. Chile, Chile. She wasn't saying Chile. She was saying chile. I just didn't realize she was spelling it that way. So I thought it was hysterical. I was like, you've been saying this for over a year now, and I'm now realizing you're not saying Chile. You're saying chile. So that's what she's saying. So it's funny. Hey, Lisa. All right, guys. Hey, Lisa, I don't know if you got my message. I messaged you because I was just going about my business, and then I got a download for you. So I sent you what I got, and you never responded. So I'm like, I guess you got it. I don't know. So I hope you got the I don't know if it was advice or it was about the business or about the jail, but let me know if you got it or not. But anyways, okay, so we're doing Neil. Neil, so I don't have to be the long-suffering wife or the belittled husband or the victim of my relationships in order to render them holy or to make them pleasing in God's eyes. God, good grief, of course not. Neil, and I don't have to put up with attacks on my dignity, assaults on my pride, damage to my psyche, and wounds to my heart in order to say that I gave it my best in a relationship, did my duty or met my obligation in the eyes of God and man? God, not for 1 minute. Neil, then pray God, tell me, what promises should I make in relationship? What agreements must I keep? What obligations do relationships carry? What guidelines should I seek? God. The answer is the answer you cannot hear, for it leaves you without guidelines and renders null and void every agreement in the moment you make it. The answer is you have no obligation, neither in relationship nor in all of life. Neil, no obligation. God, no obligation, nor any restriction or limitation, nor any guidelines or rules. Nor are you bound by any circumstances or situations, nor constrained by any code or law. Nor are you punishable for any offense, nor capable of any, for there is no such thing as being offensive in the eyes of God. Neil, I've heard this before, this there are no rules kind of religion. That's spiritual anarchy. I don't see how that can work. God, there is no way it cannot work. If you are about the business of creating yourself, let me repeat that. There is no way it cannot work if you are about the business of creating yourself. If, on the other hand, you imagine yourself to be about the task of trying to be what someone else wants you to be, the absence of rules or guidelines might indeed make things difficult. Yet the thinking mind begs to ask, if God has a way she wants me to be, why didn't she simply create me that way to begin with? Why all this struggle for me to overcome who I am in order for me to become what God wants me to be? This the problem mind demands to know, and rightly so, for it is a proper inquiry. The religionists would have you believe that I created you as less than who I am, so that you could have the chance to become as who I am, working against all odds, and I might add, against every natural tendency I am supposed to have given you. Among these so-called natural tendencies is the tendency to sin. You are taught that you were born in sin, that you will die in sin, and that to sin is your nature. One of your religions even teaches you that you can do nothing about this. Your own actions are irrelevant and meaningless. It is arrogant to think that by some action of yours you can get to heaven. There is only one way to heaven, salvation, and that is through no undertaking of your own, but through the grace granted you by God through acceptance of his Son as your intermediary. Once this is done, you are saved. Until it is done, nothing that you do, not the life you live, not the choices you make, not anything you undertake of your own will, in any effect to improve yourself or render you worthy, has any effect, bears any influence. You are incapable of rendering yourself worthy, because you are inherently unworthy. You were created that way. Why? God only knows. Perhaps he made a mistake. Perhaps he didn't get it right. Maybe he wishes he could Maybe he wishes he could have it all to do over again. But there it is. What to do? Neil, you're making mock of me. God, no, you are making mock of me. You are saying that I, God, made inherently imperfect beings, then have demanded of them to be perfect or face damnation. You are saying then that somewhere several thousand years into the world's experience, I relented, saying that from then on you didn't necessarily have to be good. You simply had to feel bad when you were not being good, and accept as your Savior the one being who could always be perfect, thus satisfying my hunger for perfection. You are saying that my Son, who you call the one perfect one, has saved you from your own imperfection, the imperfection I gave you. In other words, God's Son has saved you from what his Father did. This is how you, many of you, say I've set it up. Now who is mocking whom? Neil, that is the second time in this book you seem to have launched a frontal attack on fundamentalist Christianity. I am surprised. God, you have chosen the word attack. I am simply engaging the issue. And the issue, by the way, is not fundamentalist Christianity, as you put it. It is the entire nature of God and of God's relationship to man. The question comes up here because we were discussing the matter of obligations in relationships and in life itself. You cannot believe in an obligationless relationship because you cannot accept who and what you really are. You call a life of complete freedom spiritual anarchy. I call it God's great promise. It is only within the context of this promise that God's great plan can be completed. You have no obligation in relationship. You have only opportunity. Opportunity, not obligation, is the cornerstone of religion, the basis of all spirituality. So long as you see it the other way around, you will have missed the point. Relationship, your relationship to all things, was created as your perfect tool in the work of the soul. That is why all human relationships are sacred ground. It is why every personal relationship is holy. In this, many churches have it right. Marriage is a sacrament, but not because of its sacred obligations, rather because of its unequaled opportunity. Never do anything in relationship out of a sense of obligation. Do whatever you do out of a sense of the glorious opportunity your relationship affords you to decide and to be who you really are. Neil, I can hear that. Yet over and over in my relationships, I have given up when the going gets tough. The result is that I've had a string of relationships where I thought, as a kid, that I'd have only one. I don't seem to know what it's like to hold on to a relationship. Do you think I will ever learn? What do I have to do to make it happen? God, you make it sound as if holding on to a relationship means it's been a success. Try not to confuse longevity with a job well done. Remember, your job on the planet is not to see how long you can stay in a relationship. It's to decide and experience who you really are. This is not an argument for short-term relationships, yet neither is there a requirement for long-term ones. Still, while there is no such requirement, this much should be said. Long-term relationships do hold remarkable opportunities for mutual growth, mutual expression, and mutual fulfillment. And that has its own reward. Neil, I know. I've always suspected that. So how do I get there? God, first, make sure you get into a relationship for the right reasons. I'm using the word right here as a relative term. I mean right relative to the larger purpose you hold in your life. As I have indicated before, most people still enter relationships for the wrong reasons: to end loneliness, fill a gap, bring themselves love, or someone to love. And those are some of the better reasons. Others do so to salve their ego, end their depressions, improve their sex life, recover from a previous relationship, or, believe it or not, to relieve boredom. None of these reasons will work, and unless something dramatic changes along the way, neither will the relationship. I didn't enter into my relationship for any of those reasons. I would challenge that. I don't think you know why you entered your relationships. I don't think you thought about it in this way. I don't think you entered your relationships purposefully. I think you entered your relationships because you fell in love. Neil, that's exactly right. God, and I don't think you stopped to look at why you fell in love. What was it to which you were responding? What need or set of needs was being fulfilled? For most people, love is a response to need fulfillment. Everyone has needs. You need this, another needs that. You both see in each other a chance for need fulfillment. So you agree tactically to a trade. I'll trade you what I've got if you'll give me what you've got. It's a transaction, but you don't tell the truth about it. You don't say, I trade you very much. You say, I love you very much. And then the disappointment begins. Neil, you've made this point before. God, yes, and you've done this thing before, not once, but several times. Neil, sometimes this book seems to be going in circles, making the same points over and over again. God, sort of like life. Neil, touche. God, the process here is that you're asking the questions that I'm merely answering them. If you ask the same question 3 different ways, I'm obliged to continue answering it. Neil, maybe I keep hoping you'll come up with a different answer. You take a lot of the romance out of it when I ask you about relationships. What's wrong with falling head over heels in love without having to think about it? God, nothing. Fall in love with as many people as you like that way. But if you're going to form a lifelong relationship with them, you may want to add a little thought. On the other hand, if you enjoy going through relationships like water, or worse yet, staying in one because you think you have to, then living a life of quiet desperation, if you enjoy repeating these patterns from your past, keep right on doing what you've been doing. Neil, okay, I get it. Boy, you're relentless, aren't you? God, that's the problem with truth. The truth is relentless. It won't leave you alone. It keeps creeping up on you from every side, showing you what's really so. That can be annoying. Neil, okay, so I want to find the tools for a long-term relationship. And you say entering relationships purposefully is one of them. God, yes. Be sure you and your mate agree on purpose. If you both agree at a conscious level that the purpose of your relationship is to create an opportunity, not an obligation, an opportunity for growth, for full self-expression, for lifting your lives to their highest potential, for healing every false thought or small idea you ever had about you, or for ultimate reunion with God through the communion of your two souls, if you take that vow instead of the vows you've been taking, the relationship has begun on a very good note. It's gotten off on the right foot. That's a very good beginning. Neil, still, it's no guarantee of success. God, if you want guarantees in life, then you don't want life. You want rehearsals for a script that's already been written. Life, by its nature, cannot have guarantees, or its whole purpose is thwarted. Neil. Okay, got it. So now I've got my relationship off to this very good start. Now, how do I keep it going? God. Know and understand that there will be challenges and difficult times. Don't try to avoid them. Welcome them gratefully. See them as grand gifts from God, glorious opportunities to do what you came into the relationship and life to do. Try very hard not to see your partner as the enemy or as the opposition during these times. In fact, seek to see no one and nothing as the enemy or even the problem. Cultivate the technique of seeing all problems as opportunities. Opportunities to Neil. I know. Be and decide who you really are. God. Right. You're getting it. You are getting it. Neil. Sounds like a pretty dull life to me. God. Then you're setting your sights too low. Broaden the scope of your horizons. Extend the depth of your vision. See more in you than you think there is to be seen. See more in your partner too. You will never disserve your relationship, nor anyone, by seeing more in another than they are showing you. For there is more there, much more. It is only their fear that stops them from showing you. If others notice that you see them as more, they will feel safe to show you what you obviously already see. Neil, people tend to live up to our expectations of them. God, something like that. I don't like the word expectations here. Expectations ruin relationships. Let's say that people tend to see in themselves what we see in them. The grander our vision, the grander their willingness to access and display the part of them we have shown them. Isn't that how all truly blessed relationships work? Isn't that part of the healing process, the process by which we give people permission to let go of every false thought they've ever had about themselves? Isn't that what I am doing here in this book for you? Neil, yes. God, and that is the work of God. The work of the soul is to wake yourself up. The work of God is to wake everybody else up. Neil, we do this by seeing others as who they are, by reminding them of who they are. God, this you can do in two ways, by reminding them of who they are. Very difficult because they will not believe you, and by remembering who you are, much easier because you do not need their belief, only your own. Demonstrating this consistently ultimately reminds others of who they are, for they will see themselves in you. Many masters have been sent to the earth to demonstrate eternal truth. Others, such as John the Baptist, have been sent as messengers telling of the truth in glowing terms, speaking of God with unmistakable clarity. These special messengers have been gifted with extraordinary insight and the very special power to see and receive eternal truth, plus the ability to communicate complex concepts in ways that can and will be understood by the masses. You are such a messenger. Neil, I am? God, yes. Do you believe this? Neil, it is such a difficult thing to accept. I mean, all of us want to be special. God, all of you are special. Neil, and the ego gets in there, at least with me it does, and tries to make us feel somehow chosen for an amazing assignment. I have to fight that ego all the time, seek to purify and repurify my every thought, word, and deed so as to keep personal aggrandizement out of it. So it's very difficult to hear what you're saying because I'm aware that it plays to my ego, and I've spent all my life fighting my ego. God, I know you have, and sometimes not too successfully. Neil, I am shireened to have to agree. God, yet always when it has come to God, you have let the ego drop. Many is the night you have begged and pleaded for clarity, beseeched the heavens for insight, not so that you could enrich yourself or heap honor upon yourself, but out of the deep purity of a simple yearning to know. Neil, yes. God, and you have promised me over and over again that you should be caused to know you would spend the rest of your life, every waking moment, sharing eternal truth with others, not out of a need to gain glory, but out of your heart's deepest desire, to end the pain and suffering of others, to bring joy and gladness, and help and healing, to reconnect others with the sense of partnership with God you have always experienced. Neil, yes, yes. God, and so I have chosen you to be my messenger, you and many others. For now, during these times immediately ahead, the world will need many trumpets to sound the clarion call. The world will need many voices to speak the words of truth and healing for which millions long. The world will need many hearts joined together in the work of the soul and prepared to do the work of God. Can you honestly claim that you are not aware of this? Neil, no. God, can you honestly deny that this is why you came? Neil, no. God, are you ready then with this book to decide and to declare your own eternal truth and to announce and articulate the glory of mine? Neil, must I watch these last few exchanges in the book? God, you don't have to do anything. Remember, in our relationship, you have no obligation, only opportunity. Is this not the opportunity for which you have waited all your life? Have you not devoted yourself to this mission and the proper preparation for it from the earliest moments of youth? Neil, yes. God, then do not what you are obliged to do, but what you have an opportunity to do. As to placing all of this in our book, why would you not? Thank you that I want you to be a messenger in secret? Neil, no, I suppose not. God, it takes great courage to announce oneself as a man of God. You yourself, the world, will much more readily accept you as virtually anything else. But a man of God, an actual messenger, every one of my messengers have been defiled. Far from gaining glory, they have gained nothing but heartache. Are you willing? Does your heart ache to tell the truth about me? Are you willing to endure the ridicule of your fellow human beings? Are you prepared to give up glory on earth for the greater glory of the soul fully realized? Neil, you're making this all sound suddenly pretty heavy, God. God, you want I should kid you about it? Neil, well, we could just lighten up a little here. God, hey, I'm all for enlightenment. Why don't we end this chapter with a joke? God, Neil, good idea. You got one? God, no, but you do. Tell the one about the little girl drawing a picture. Neil, oh yes, that one. Okay. Well, a mommy came into the kitchen one day to find her little girl at the table, crayons everywhere, deeply concentrating on a freehand picture she was creating. My, what are you so busy drawing? The mommy asked. It's a picture of God, Mommy, the beautiful girl replied, eyes shining. Oh, honey, that's so sweet, the mommy said, trying to be helpful. But no one really knows what God looks like. Well, chirped the little girl, if you'll just let me finish. God, that's a beautiful little joke. Do you know what's most beautiful? The little girl never doubted that she knew exactly how to draw me. Neil, yes. God, now I'll tell you a story, and with that we can end this chapter. Neil, all right. God, there once was a man who suddenly found himself spending hours each week writing a book. Day after day, he would race to pad and pen, sometimes in the middle of the night, to capture each new inspiration. Finally, someone asked him what he was up to. Oh, he replied, I'm writing down a very long conversation I'm having with God. That's very sweet, his friend indulged him, but no one really knows for sure what God would say. Well, the man grinned, if you'll just let me finish. And that's the end of that chapter. So, I love this book. This is so great. It's a wonderful book. I love it. Every single time I read it, I just I love you. I love you, Mr. Book. Mr. Owl, how many licks does it take to get to a Tootsie Rose and of a Tootsie Pop? The world will never know. So it always reminds me of that whenever I think of that. So random thing there. anyways, so go ahead, guys, if you have any questions regarding the subject material. No personal readings, guys. So for those of you who showed up midway, this is not personal readings. This is our study group time. So we're reading Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh, and we're discussing the topic from the book. And so if you want to ask me regarding the subject material, you're more than welcome to do so. But everything is going to be based on the topics here. All right, guys, so let me look around here to see what you guys have to say about this. And actually, and here's what I'll say, because, people always wonder, because I always tell people, like, I have conversations with God. I talk to God every single day. I talk to God all the time. Sometimes I talk to my soul, which is Aja, a higher version of myself, but Aja is just another grander version of myself that I can encompass, or I can fathom. God is like just another layer of that. But I'm always having conversations with God. I'm always having conversations with the divine, because I'm worthy of that. I am deserving of having a conversation with the grander version of us, as we all are. And I think that's the problem. Many people just don't think of themselves as worthy, or they don't think that they are allowed to. If I weren't allowed to, I would be struck by lightning, and it hasn't happened yet. So, strike me down, God, if I'm not supposed to talk to you. It hasn't happened yet. And in fact, it only has gotten stronger and more intense and more like cutthroat and to the point. So I get even more now from God. I get more conversation from God than I ever have gotten in my entire life. And I feel so blessed that I can just have that kind of conversation. But at the same time, you're only able to grasp as much of God as you're able to conceptualize God. In other words, if you are coming from a religious belief system, that belief system has trained you and conditioned you to only consider God as a certain thing, or it fits within a certain structure or box. So when you even consider having a relationship with God, it fundamentally will fall into a category or into a method that aligns with that structure or with that box. Because a long time ago, I dismissed that box and I said, screw it, I want to have a conversation with God. I want to have my own conversation with God. I decided I was not going to put myself in a box, and I was going to allow myself to just feel that connection and just have that conversation, no holds barred. I'm not going to hold back, and allow myself and think of myself as worthy enough to be able to do so. And it has actually been affirmed for me, and it continues to be affirmed. And the bigger I can allow myself to think of God, the bigger God becomes, the more I get. So that's part of the process there. And psychic ability, when I talk to people about psychic ability and tuning in and stuff, it's only just another version of understanding that knowledge and wisdom in a very unique, methodical way. That's all that is for me. Hey guys, sounds of grateful. Okay, cool. Let's see if you, Red Robin's like, obligation to be morally bound. Do you think all relationships based on obligation are bad, that you cannot gain personally? No, not at all. I actually think if you go in understanding that that you're going to operate from a place of obligation, you're agreeing to those terms. So it's almost like a contractual agreement with going to the bank, or with a legal agreement. Like if you're agreeing to that and you're obliging that, you're coming in with the obligation that you're going to meet that, then that's your choice. You get to choose that. Unfortunately, you also tend to tie yourself down to that obligation. And what the book is basically merely saying, the conversation that Neil's having is saying, by fixating yourself or attaching yourself to the idea of obligation, you are imprisoning yourself and turning yourself into a type of slave to that struggle or that challenge. And so you're basically like giving yourself over to that, and you're not going to give yourself freedom to do this. That's part of the problem with traditional marriage. It's like, and I'll use my sister, for example. My sister, she's gone through periods in her life where she's gotten into relationships that could have turned into marriages, but then she started to overthink it. And then they would get to the point where they get engaged, or then they get married, or she'd actually never got married, but they would get engaged, or they'd start planning something, and then she'd pull back because she think it. When you overthink things, you are essentially trying to control life. You're trying to have a guarantee. There's no guarantee. Nothing in life is guaranteed. There's no guarantee I'm going to be here tomorrow to finish my book. There's no guarantee that, if you have a child, you're going to stay alive to see that child grow up, or to even be able to take care of that child. There's no guarantee, because you don't control life. You can manifest a type of life before you. You can align with manifestations, but you're not here to control life. You're here to be a witness to it and to be a collaborative co-creator with Source. That's all you're here to do. Now, you can make choices and force a change or force life to go in a particular direction. You're going to be the recipient of those choices. You're going to be the recipient of those decisions. It's interesting because I've now there's a saying that I'm coming up with now where I'm like, I wish upon you all the outcomes of your choices and decisions. I wish upon you all the outcomes of your choices and decisions. Because everybody always tells everybody, bless you, may God bless you, or, maybe you have a blessed day. But people make really bad choices and decisions, and I don't think they always grasp the fact that that choice is going to lead to an outcome. That decision is going to lead to a consequence. Everything, whether it's positive or negative, those thoughts, those beliefs are going to lead to consequences. And so I wish for people the outcome and the benefit, or the consequences of their actions, of their choices, of their decisions. I wish that for themselves. I'm not wishing them ill. I'm just wishing them what they choose. And that's exactly what God does. God chooses to honor what we desire, what we are choosing as well. And so what we choose, we end up getting in one way or another, whether we're consciously doing it or not. God is only allowing for that to be. There's no interference there. But there are relationships that are based in the idea of obligation that could be beneficial. Nothing is wasted. Remember, nothing is wasted. Even if you make horrible decisions or you miscreate, you're still going to gain something from it because nothing is ever wasted. Everything is opportunity. Everything is an opportunity to know yourself. Even though the worst things you could go through are opportunities to know yourself and understand yourself. It's not about being diminished, because you can never be diminished. You can never be destroyed. Good question, Sarah Stardust. It's funny because it's Stardust Sarah, but I like saying Sarah Stardust. How can you discern between a being and a higher power talking to you? Sarah, have you ever thought, it's so interesting because I was thinking about you, Stardust. It'd be interesting for people. You have people who want to be bakers, or they want to make stuff, or they want to make breads that are flavored. I wonder if someone's thought about an idea of coming up with custom flour, custom dough mixes, where they're basically produced custom made for the person because they desire that, but there's certain things that are offered, but there's these mixes that can be made, and then they're vacuum sealed, and then you send it off or ship it, and then you call it Sarah Stardust. It's what's Sarah Stardust? Oh, it's the best bread ever. It's the best thing ever. So you may want to think about it as a business idea. But going back to this, how can you discern between it being higher power or talking to you and not your inner thoughts? So when you're talking to a higher power, there is no fear there. It is not a scary, there's no fear. There's no fear. There's no fear in it. When you're talking to yourself, there are the what ifs that are based in fear. So that's one key that I've learned is when I'm talking to my highest self, it just is. And I don't have a feeling about it. I'm more caught up in what it's saying or what it's sharing with me versus me in fear about what is being shared or the fact that it's being shared at all. So there's no fear about it. So there's no fear of repercussions. There's no fear of diminishment. There's no fear of anything, right? In that way, it's just knowledge and information. And then however you choose to receive it, that's how you receive it, whether you agree with it or not. But when it comes to your own inner psyche, there's fear attached to it. And if the fear is so extreme, or if the fear is so ingrained in what you're perceiving, at that point you have to be very careful, because there are times when I perceived the future and I perceived it from my fear-based mindset, and it turned out to be way less accurate than I perceived it without any fear attached to it, but I still had a concern or a worry. There was a lot more accuracy there. Doesn't mean it was a perfect prediction, but it was more accurate. So there's a level of that. And it's the same thing with speaking to your higher self. There's no fear in speaking to your highest self. There's no fear in speaking to God. There's actually only, it's a sense of affirming, so it's almost how do you know when you are talking to your own, how do you know when you're thinking about your inner words, or when you're talking to a parent that's very loving to you and they're giving you advice from a loving place. You know, you may not agree with it, you may not want to hear it, but it's not like there's fear attached to it. There's no like, you know, but when you're talking to yourself, there's a lot of this back and forth and tossing around. And then when you get into the what ifs, what if this bad thing happens? What if this is happening? You know, that's fear. And there's less accuracy in that. Yeah, Red Robin. You know, I've talked to spirits who they were parents and they did not stay in their child's life. And the child was either raised by someone else or someone else came along and was part of their, you know, part of their raising process. And I've had those spirits come back and apologize that they were not a part of that person's life, but then also acknowledge that they actually were better off without them being a part of their life because they were so screwed up they wouldn't have been able to give them the opportunities that they were specifically supposed to have in this lifetime with their experiences. So, and it's because that individual did not meet their obligations. They did not support the child. They did not raise the child. They walked away. So it comes down to that. And I know people who were actually better off being raised by people who were not the parents because the parents just neglected the obligation they had as parents, and the child was raised by, you know, grandparents or so forth, and they were better off. It's not always the case, but you know, that happens. And so it just depends on it depends on the situation itself. Same thing with like an aging parent. And I know people who really, really tried to be there for their parent who had dementia. And after a few years of accidents and dealing with a lot of like, you know, trauma, and then the parent sometimes becomes abusive, they couldn't do it anymore. And they had to put their parent in a home. And so people can look at them and say, you know, you're not meeting your obligations. You like just, you know, you threw your mother in a home and you locked the key and you walked away. But people don't always realize everything that goes along with that. I myself personally, as much as I love my mother, like I don't really want to live with my mom, even though I think if I did live with my mom, I think she would probably be a healthier person, or she would be better off, because I always made sure that she ate healthy. I always made sure that she got exercise. I mean, I was always on top of her ass about stuff. But you know, where she is now, which is she's surrounded by people who, you know, her significant other and his family and so forth, even though she's not the healthiest person, she has a lot more freedom than she would with me, because I can be a bit of a control freak, right? Because I want to make sure she's okay. So I think that allowing her to just be is better for her. And I think, you know, me not being as involved is better for both of us, from our mental state or for our mental point of view. But for some people, it works out. Some people are able to take care of their parents. I know someone who took care of both of his parents for 10, 15, 20 years. And then, you know, they finally passed away. But it wasn't an easy process, and I could see them go through it for those years. There's some people, they just can't do it. They can't do it. And it's okay. You're not an evil person because you have human limits. And you just couldn't do it. So I understand the process, which is why, you know, I don't always feel bad. And some people may not agree with me. Like here in New Mexico, they just approved assisted. I guess you can call it assisted suicide. But if someone has a terminal illness and the doctors have given them only so much time to live, and it's probably going to be a very painful experience for them, they have to get 2 doctors to sign off on it, and then a psychiatrist or a psychologist to sign off on it, and then they can end their own life, or have assisted suicide. My partner and I, we have an agreement. If one of us gets to a state where it's becoming so difficult and challenging for the other, we've given each other permission to have assisted suicide so that we can release the other of that obligation. We have that agreement. So that's what we understand. You know, but people have their own opinions. I know people who kept their loved ones alive for years and years in comas, or years and years trying to make them, you know, trying to uphold those obligations. And it actually caused more damage in their lives and did not really help the person who was bedridden or was not even awake. And then they finally passed. My uncle, who was a very lively person. He was a doctor, and he worked all the way up until like his 80s. And then once he stopped working, he pretty much just like mentally shut down, and then he was bedridden, for 2 or 3 years. Someone who I knew as a very lively person who could take care of himself, and he was very able-bodied, all of a sudden who took care of everybody else, and then all of a sudden he's got to have his diaper changed twice a day or whatnot. I mean, that's an awful thing to have to go through, and I think if he had it his way, he would have died. Because when we went to visit him before that happened, before he even got into that state, because I went, myself, my partner, my sister, and her at the time, her partner, my mom, we went there, and he had never had a Thanksgiving dinner. Like, he had never had it. Like, because that was just not something they ever did. He was always working or whatnot. And I was like, I can't believe, like, you've never had Thanksgiving. So I said, I'm going to make you a Thanksgiving dinner, Theo. Like, I'm going to make you one. So I, like, called my partner's mom, and I got all her recipes because her stuff is amazing. And I made him, like, a full-blown Thanksgiving dinner, turkey with the dressing and, the ham, macaroni and cheese, everything. And mashed potatoes. And he like sopped it up, but he had never had a Thanksgiving dinner. So that was like a first for him. But I remember when we were visiting him, he was very open and very vulnerable. And like we would sing songs and he would play the guitar and everything. And he was like, I think I only want to live one more year. I think I'm ready to join my brothers and sisters. I think I only want to be here one more year. He ended up going on for 3 or 4 more years and then passing away. But he spent 2 or 3 years like bedridden. And I hate that he had to even be in that state, because who wants to be like that? Who wants to be stuck in that situation? Now, I'm not saying that everyone should go out and take their own life if they're having to deal with that reality, because everyone's path is different, everyone's journey is different. But at the same time, it is your life. It is your life. You can do whatever the hell you want. This is your life. And I honestly believe that people should have the right to live their lives as they choose. And if in certain places that's allowable, it's okay, then that should be the case. If I lose my mind and I can't even remember to like make food for myself, or I don't even know how to wipe my own ass, I don't want to be here, and I don't want to put that on anybody else. And it doesn't serve a purpose at that point, and I don't want people to see me go through years of this and be heartbroken to have to do that as well. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go through that. I don't want people to have to go through that for me either. And I think that's more of a kindness to all of us than it is to have to endure for years and years and years in a state like that. So that's just my perspective. Let's see here. Yeah, so, and Shauna, that's a good question, or that's a good comment. Shauna on Facebook. So she says, I am a believer. I talk to God all the time, but I don't ever hear him answer me back. Also, I don't know how to talk to my soul. So I think that part of that is because people do not fully grasp what that communication is like. When we connect with our highest self, it's not this like disembodied voice that you can hear in your ears. You don't hear it in your ears. It is not this disembodied voice that you hear in your mind either. It is your own voice in a very different, coming from a completely different point of view or perspective. When I talk to Aja, my soul, when I talk to God, I don't hear it in the form of another voice. I hear it as my voice, but much wiser, much more ancient, and it's much more subtle. And it is it's, in other words, for example, think of the last conversation you had with someone you know. Let's say you had a conversation with a friend yesterday or today or whatever, and then remember that conversation. If you remember that conversation, it's a memory that's playing out in your head of that conversation. You're having a memory play out in your head. That's the same way that's the same process they use to communicate with us. They're using those same mechanisms in our brain to communicate with us. So it's the memory of a communication or of a conversation or of talking, but it isn't communication that has happened yet. It's not a memory that has occurred yet. It is happening live, but it happens the same way. So if you're thinking that you're going to hear a disembodied voice, or you're going to hear this Shauna, what are you doing? No, it's not going to sound like that. It's going to sound like yourself, but different. But it's enough of a subtle difference that unless you're paying attention to what you sound like in your head, you're not going to pick up or understand those subtle changes from one person or perspective to another. So when I talk to spirits, it's so subtle. I mean, it really is super subtle, and it's mostly in my voice that I'm hearing it, not in a voice of a spirit. And it's a memory. It's not a audio voice. So when they communicate, they're communicating using what I've already been doing since I was a child, hearing my own voice in my head, talking about stuff or going over stuff. That's what they're going to use as well, because that's the easiest way in. But once you practice listening and understanding the different subtle differences, then you'll start to realize that there is a big difference between one kind of inner voice that I already hear, and then another one. So like, for example, when I'm talking to spirits, and I tell this to my clients, when I'm communicating with a spirit, they are going off and they're sharing information with me, but it's not like it's all vocalized as if it's a conversation that we're having with words and sentences and etc. They're using thoughts, emotions, memories, signs, symbols. They're using all of that, including the memory of my inner voice, to communicate stuff across. But whenever I'm communicating with one spirit, when another spirit begins to communicate, it's not like I automatically know that somebody else has started communicating. What happens at that point is if someone else jumps in on the conversation, I may still be thinking I'm talking to the same spirit because I'm like kind of going with the role of what I'm getting. But at some point, when I start to share with the client and the pieces when they were fitting with one person, all of a sudden they're no longer fitting, or it's not clicking anymore. At that point, I'm like, wait a minute. And then I have to pay attention. Is the information that I'm getting, does it feel the same in subtle variation in the way that I was just getting it from this, one spirit, or is it slightly different? Does it feel different? And that's the same thing. So like, for example, like if someone's texting their friend, and they're texting their friend and their friend responds, but the response doesn't sound like the typical response they would normally give you. At that point, you're not going to say like, just accept that. Then it's like, well, that's weird. That's a weird response from them. Like, oh, okay, whatever. But you don't take it, you don't think about it. And then you comment again, or you text them again, and then they text you back. And then the second text is like, it really doesn't sound like them. And you're like, does someone have your phone? Or is this you, or does someone have your phone? Because it doesn't. At that point, you notice there's a subtle difference in what's happened. It's the same thing in my head. When they're communicating with me, there's a subtle difference that happens. But you have to get used to those subtle differences, because once you get used to it, you can identify who you're talking to. So like when I'm out there and I'm walking and I'm thinking about concepts, or I'm having questions in my mind, I will have a dialogue with God, and I'm receiving the information back in blocks of in blocks. There are these blocks of data, and I have to start to stop and figure it out. Sometimes I have to stop in the middle of my walk and type down what they're telling me or what I'm getting, because it's important or significant. Sometimes when I'm having conversations with Aja, it feels more conversive, and it feels more like me and me, versus when I'm talking to God, where it feels like it's a much elevated version. And so there's definitely a obvious difference between me in this moment now versus God in this higher perspective that is not always the easiest to grasp. So it takes practice, and one of the best ways to practice is through typing or through writing in some way, so that you can start to get into a flow state of just typing out or putting down whatever is being dropped in your head. And at first it may come across like it's just you having thoughts, or you having a conversation with yourself, until at some point there's a difference and a subtle shift, and then you'll pick up on that, and then you can start having that two-person dialogue, or that conversation with your higher self. And these trolls are definitely these trolls are hitting everybody in the room. By the way, guys, people are asking you to inbox them or whatever. They're going to take your money, so be careful. So August has a good question. August 86. Have you talked with anyone that was in a coma for a long time or on life support for a while before passing? Do they generally say they wish their POA pulled the plug? Yes, I've actually had the experience of being able to do both. So my friend Chelsea was in a coma before they took her off life support. And my friend Chelsea was reading Conversations with God right before she passed. And so she was part of a hit and run. For those of you who are in Houston, if you go to the intersection of Montrose and Waugh, there's a ghost bike there right across the street from the Wells Fargo Bank. That's Chelsea's bike. That's her ghost bike. There's actually a picture from the Houston Chronicle of me in front of. I just happened to show up because I was bringing her some French bread and some wine. I was bringing her ghost bike. I was bringing some French bread and wine because that's who she was. She was very French inspired, and I just happened to be there when Paula, she was a photographer for the Houston Chronicle, she was there. So she was taking pictures of me while I was leaving the stuff for Chelsea. But Chelsea, before she died, and she was in a coma for about 3 or 4 days, her family was trying to figure out what to do because she was on life support and there was no brain function. And they are Christians, so they don't believe in, killing somebody. To them, that was killing somebody. So a couple of things happened, and it got a little complicated because the day before I went to see, I went to go visit with her, and Roxy, my assistant, and we went to go visit with her, and so did Sophia, another friend of ours, and we went in and so forth. And then that night she came to visit me in a dream. I wasn't communicating while I was there in the hospital. I was communicating in dream before she visited me in a dream. Because whenever it's something that I feel super, super emotionally impacted by, it's really hard for me to get into my psychic or mediumship brain to be able to have that conversation. I can't do it. That's why it's harder for psychics and mediums to do it with their own families than it is to do it for strangers, because we care so much more for our own relatives. I miss my Thea. I miss my friend Chelsea. I am able to talk to them now because I've gotten better at being objective, but it's a lot harder when you're in the moment and they're on life support and you're seeing them, this beautiful girl become this bald. She was shaved and bald, and there was all of the stitches in her head, and I mean she just looked like it was not a sight that I really want to remember. So in the dream, I was in her hospital room and she was standing next to her body. And she was herself, but she was next to her body that was in the bed. And she was like, look, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I can do anything. I can do anything. And she was super, super I can do anything. And this is, this is what I can do. And I can recover. And, I believe in law of attraction. I believe in manifestation. And I can overcome this. I can come out of this. And behind her in the dream was her grandmother, or an older lady. I didn't know it was her grandmother, but there was an older lady. And the older lady looked to me, and even though Chelsea was telling me one thing, her grandmother, who had passed years prior, was telling me, what did she tell me? Because Chelsea was excited, and she was like, I can do anything, I can do anything. And her grandmother said, she's just being stubborn. She's just being stubborn. So she wants it her way, but she's just being stubborn and hard-headed. And I knew what she meant when she said that, meaning that, maybe Chelsea's not supposed to survive this, and maybe it is her time to go, and she's just being hard-headed and stubborn, and she's trying to hang on or hold on because she believes she can overcome this. So that's what happened in the dream. So I went to the hospital the next day, and I shared this dream with the family. I shared it with one person in the family, and they wanted to huddle everybody together because they wanted me to share the rest of my dream. What's interesting is funny because to some extent, they didn't like me. The father didn't like me because he didn't believe in psychics and he thought that psychics were all evil and all of that other stuff. But at the same time, there's a lot going on that you can't dismiss. And so I shared a dream. He's actually very, very cordial, very appreciative, didn't disrespect me at all. And while we're there talking about the dream that Chelsea had, a woman comes into the waiting room in the waiting area with her daughter, and she's like, we're here to see Chelsea and we're here to talk to the family. And the family were like, okay. And she says, I know Chelsea. I know of Chelsea. And a year ago, or a little over a year ago, her daughter had been in a car accident and had the same exact head injury or brain injury that Chelsea had. And they wanted to take her daughter off life support. And her daughter she didn't want to give up on her daughter, even though they were telling her that she needed to let her go. She said, I don't want to give up on her. And so at that point, she says, I'm gonna believe that she can pull through. And so she's like, look at my daughter, look at her. And her daughter's standing right there, and she pulled through. And she had to go through this whole recovery process, but she recovered from the same type of brain injury that Chelsea was having. So at that point, it just threw a whole lot of like influence about letting her live or to keep her going. And so that was a really tough thing for them, because the doctors were saying one thing. Here I am having Chelsea come in a dream saying, I can do this, I can overcome this, I can do anything. And this woman who was with her daughter had no idea that Chelsea had had an accident or was in the hospital on life support, was in the hospital across the street with a doctor's appointment for her daughter as a follow-up when they found out about Chelsea. And then they found out she was just in the hospital across the street. And then they came over and told the family. So it's like, what do you do, right? And myself, I was very upset because I thought that this was all divine intervention, that Chelsea should live. She should try, they should give her a chance. But at the same time, I remember what her grandmother said, which was, she's just being stubborn. She's just being hard-headed. The family decided, because Chelsea was a very free-spirited. She would travel the world. She used to do a lot of wolfing, going to these farms in France and like being part of the farmers and picking, vegetables. And so, I remember, like, I think I still have a text from her, or a message from her, messaging me in the middle of the night, hey, Ferny, so my farts all smell like, I'm very farty, and I think it's because of all the fresh broccoli I'm eating now. Like she just messaged me random stuff like that. And we just have conversations, and I've saved them. But they decided that if Chelsea was going to live, they wanted her to have the opportunity to live as the freest version of herself. If she could not be the freest version of herself, then they didn't want to let her live, because they did not want her to be bedridden or to be a vegetable. And the doctors kept telling them that she would be a vegetable. She would not be able to do anything, and she would be stuck in that body like a prison. And so they felt it was the best decision for them to let her go. And they let her go. I was so heartbroken, and I was so upset. I actually was really upset and angry. And I remember going home that night and breaking down crying, because I was like, what is wrong? Like, she's telling them that she can do this, and this person just out of nowhere comes up and is telling them that her daughter had the same brain injury, and her daughter's right there standing living proof that you can overcome this. Like, how much more do you need? And so I was very upset. And so, they let her go, and we mourned her passing. And then it turns out, right shortly thereafter, Chelsea came to me, and she said they made the right choice. And she didn't realize it at the time, but they made the right choice. Because had she lived, she would have been living for herself only. And the experiences she would have had would have only benefited her to some extent. But her death is a catalyzing effect. It's a catalyst for a bunch of change. And that she didn't realize it at the time. She was more focused on what she was trying to, overcome and prove to people, that she could manifest being well. And that, her energy is what summoned the coincidence with the lady across the street. Lo and behold, shortly thereafter, the city of Houston starts passing all these ordinances for bikers and biking, and you have to be 25 feet or 5 feet out. And so all these laws in Houston and ordinances, all of these biking lanes were designated. And it was right after Chelsea's passing, because her passing had such a profound effect, and it became such a cultural shift for bicyclists, that now there's a lot less incidents of bicyclists being killed on the road because of that, even though there had already been bicyclists killed. But they hadn't gotten as much attention as Chelsea. She made the front page of the news. I was on the front page of the Chronicle because of the story about bicyclists and the laws being changed, because of her. And so I didn't understand it at the time, because I was so caught up in my pain and my loss with her. And so, I've connected with Chelsea a few times since then, and the last time I checked in with her, there was a lecture happening, and she was on stage giving a lecture to all the souls that were visiting, wanting to hear her story or hear what she was talking about with life and all of these things. So she's teaching lectures on the other side. But that's the last time I talked to her, because it's been a while since I chatted with her. But this is what it is. This is what it is. So we don't always know everything. So yes, I have had the unique experience of being able to communicate with someone who's in a coma. She was in a coma for several days. I also communicated with my aunt who right before she passed, she went into a coma, and they had to decide to let her off life support or not. But she was ready to go, and she was okay to go. And she actually told me she didn't want to live this way. So they knew that, and the family knew that already as well. So yes, I have had the unique experience of doing that. And actually, when I speak and communicate with people who are suffering from Alzheimer's or suffering from severe dementia, I actually talk to them as if they're spirits, which is the most interesting thing, because I didn't know I could do that until I found myself having conversations and sharing with people who were here, conversations with their loved ones, but their loved ones were still alive, but they were suffering from extreme dementia. And what I realize now, and what Aja told me, is that when someone is suffering from dementia, they are no longer accepting life. They're no longer accepting of life, and their mind suddenly becomes completely convoluted, and it starts to be very, very twisted up. And a lot of that has to do with some of the traumas and experiences that they have that they no longer want to even have attachment to. And a part of it has to do with the fact that they no longer want to be here, but they're still stuck by contractual terms because of their life's contract with the soul level. And so they're still stuck in their bodies. But I've had conversations with people who were in severe dementia as well. So it's the most interesting thing. And I didn't even realize that was possible. All right, guys. I love you all. I'm out of time. So take care of yourselves, guys. I will be back next week. I'm going on vacation in a few weeks, but I think 2 more weeks, and then I'll be on vacation around the time of my birthday. But I love you all. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and pop off the other, go make some dinner.